So, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. I'm Angela Kingston. I'm a curator, and I'm here in conversation with Charlie Duck. Um, brief, uh, brief introduction. Charlie studied at the Stadel in Frankfurt, at the Royal College of Art in London, and at the University of Brighton. And he does painting, drawing, printmaking, and ceramics. And he teaches at Falmouth, and he's currently on a prestigious 5-year residency at the fire station in Poplar in East London. So this will be pretty informal, and please use the chat mechanism if you'd like to start chipping in with questions, and kind of the sooner the better, really. And we'll keep it to a crisp half hour. Okay. So, Charlie, is this your first book?
Yeah, hey, hello everyone. Thanks for coming along to this weird digital artist talk. Yeah, in a sustained sense, this is the first kind of proper book. Monograph, I suppose it's the first proper monograph. I've worked with artist books before in a more kind of lo-fi way, but this is the first kind of proper tome, and it feels like a pretty hefty thing. So yeah, this feels like a millstone around the neck.
Can you hold the book up?
Yeah, I've got quite a small head, but still, it's quite kind of sizable. Um, yeah, so
It's a
Hugh,
big book.
yeah, it's a big book. Hugh from Landfill did a really amazing job of kind of really pushing the design of the book to be as sort of supportive as possible for the kind of work we wanted to show, and the fact that it's 2 years worth of work, and kind of ordered into this book. So I think it's a really kind of feels like a very sensitive format to lend itself to the work, really.
And there are some sample pages on Landfill Editions website. Some really nice choice pages, I thought, from the 240 pages. So it's a lot of, a lot of content. And so how did it come about, Charlie?
So well, I think for Hugh and I had been talking for a while about we'd been interested in some kind of collaboration between his kind of publishing imprint and the work I was making, and we both maybe had overlaps of interest in terms of drawing in quite an expanded sense, and it was just a really kind of ongoing conversation. But the work that this book features preceded that conversation, really, and the two things overlapped at some point where we realized actually a book was a really kind of sympathetic medium to support showing this work in a way that was a much more kind of, rather than the kind of formal structure of an exhibition, that a book is something you can revisit. It feels a more temporal medium somehow. So the conversations just happened quite naturally about how best we could show the work. And then it was a really long process in some terms, because the format that the book is now in isn't necessarily how it was always going to be. And I think in hindsight, it was really benefited from having that time to really slowly allow it to find a focus under its own steam.
And can you describe, can you hold up a few sample pages, do you think?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the way the book is, there's no text really in the book. There's a very brief kind of blurb at the back, which just is quite descriptive, and it says the period of time the work was made between, and also some of the mediums, because they're all works on paper. But we decided we didn't really want any essay or dominant text in the book, just that the work should be allowed to sit as a body of work produced over this 2-year period. So it's split into I'm just going to pick pages at random, but the idea with the design was that Hugh, it was that it wasn't just a catalogue with blank page, title, text, image. It was much more about the idea that works overran. So kind of replicating how this work is made in the studio, which is quite an iterative process. And, many works are made, and then maybe there's a fallow period, and then more work is made. So it sounds like quite a lot of work when you consider there's, several hundred pages, images in the book, but actually over 2 years, that's over 700 days. So there's a lot of time between making the work, and then there's an editing process where there's kind of, so this is an example of it's split into seasons, which felt like a gentle way to structure it and give it a chronology, but without being too rigid. And then you maybe get a sense of the thematics that develop over more kind of nebulous periods of time rather than month by month or week by week. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could flick really quick and I don't know.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different, there's kind of works on paper with watercolor. There's a lot of printmaking. I was working a lot on prints. A lot of the work was made in quite limited studio situations. So I was working with printmaking and drawing and painting, but all on paper. It's nothing that's not on paper. So there's a kind of, maybe there's quite a sort of soft feeling to the work. In a soft feeling, that sounds bad, but like a sensitivity perhaps. It feels really about drawing.
Mm. Yes, you're reconnecting with the page ultimately, and the leaf of the page. It's really interesting because you've done this kind of no where there's a kind of rule almost in exhibition catalogues that you would never sort of crop an image.
Mm.
And you have images that are sort of shooting off the page, it's just one corner of them, or they might disappear off the page and then reappear on the other side. So it's really the sort of the papery feel of the drawn thing, that reemerges in the book.
Yeah, it's funny, because there's a kind of tussle there in a way, because part of me, certain images I'm quite attached to, more so than others perhaps, which would be, is inevitable when there's that many works, but it's almost kind of not being too precious about the work, and that actually images wrapping around a page was really something that Hugh and I discussed. And I mean, his design and his kind of role, it really feels collaborative. How, I made the work, and then the design is just, in my mind, is just as much a part of the work as the work itself. And this idea that things can wrap around, and the tactility of a book, and maybe you have to kind of, physically engage with the book and interact. It feels sometimes too straightforward if things are just, really nicely. I think the book is beautifully designed, but pages don't need to be kind of centered and adhering to the kind of quite rigid grid structures we think of perhaps with more traditional book design. And yet it's really gridded. If it's really well designed, you kind of, the fact that you don't notice the design speaks of how well designed it is, maybe.
Because I've worked with you on an exhibition layout, and you were unusually interested in the building. You were interested in the windows and their surface quality, and the other, the floor, the ceiling, the sort of the stairs into a space. And I thought that was unusual to be very concerned with the space. Did you start out feeling that a book was a confined space or a free space?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I think the way that I approach exhibiting work normally is it's always about this site specificity and kind of reacting, because no space is ideal. No book is ideal to show work in a sense. So it's always about kind of reacting to those challenges or limitations, but finding ways around that. And that almost kind of acknowledging explicitly the idiosyncrasies of the space or the challenges of the space or the peculiarities of it. And I felt it was just the same with a book. And that really kind of goes back to the previous conversation about images wrapping over leaves and over folds, and that you maybe can't see everything in one gaze because nothing is quite perfect anyway. And that actually it's about the rhythm in a way. I think when you see an exhibition, it's about the kind of ordering of works in the space and how you as a body navigate between works and spaces. And the book is the same idea in a sense, and that it poses different challenges, but to approach it with the same mindset, that you navigate these images from one page to the next, and maybe the rhythm builds collectively once you've got through a number of spreads.
Yeah, I find myself going really fast through them because they seem like such intimate images, and I feel like an intruder, because they're so kind of raw and confessional and awkward in a way. And then I go back, and it's funny, I'm having this kind of backwards and forwards relationship with the book. It's a bit like I was running around a gallery or something. It's quite strange, my relationship to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, it felt really strange to receive the book, because it exists in the abstract when you're looking at it online, and it's all on screen, and you don't really get that same experience. But certain things maybe register, or there are, you realize there are echoes running through the book, or something that was interesting in autumn 2018 is maybe still interesting in spring 2020, but it's been fallow or non-existent for a series of seasons, and then it comes back. And I think I find that really interesting, the idea that, sometimes I think there's a idea that artists have to forever reinvent the wheel, that each work needs to somehow exist on its own terms, but everything is kind of inherently connected to everything that precedes it and everything that follows it. And I suppose that's happens in this book, and maybe that's where, it can be a bit overwhelming just to look at so many things and then to stop and what grabs your attention. I think that's what's so nice about a book, and really what I liked with this process is that an exhibition is maybe up for a week or a month or 2 months, and then it's gone, and the documentation is never the same as the experience of being in this space. Whereas this book really exists in this kind of, it's a time capsule of that work. The design is always how it will be in the book, but each time you open it or interact with it, it's a different way of navigating the work. So I think that's kind of, reacting to the specificity of the book, perhaps.
Uh, um, One thing I really, really like is that you often work on quite cheap paper that buckles. And I really like the way that it looks like the work's been photographed to particularly sort of acknowledge those crinkles in the paper or something. I mean, was that conscious? And then you got it sitting as an illusion on the sort of pristine page of the book.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to kind of fetishize it's a funny one, because it's just the paper that's at hand, but a lot of the prints are made on a really specific kind of paper that I find it's the paper that best supports the medium. But some of those watery works where it's really crinkled, it's just because that, they weren't necessarily made with this book in mind. A lot of this work predated a book, and it was made in order, often there's a relationship between works on paper and then maybe larger works or ceramic works which are made in response to these. So sometimes it's just about what's at hand, or but also I think there's a quality to light paper that really thick heavy paper doesn't necessarily have, and it can be quite inhibitive to work on. So but it's just really the paper that's there often.
So could we talk a little bit about, could you talk a little bit about the imagery?
Yeah. I mean, it's really a lot of different things. There's a lot of cars in this work,
Yeah.
and a lot of it's just kind of, lots of motifs that recur. And I think the work is meant to be quite open. It's not really, when there's so many images, they're not each image is telling a story, but it's about these motifs that kind of register, and they accumulate, and maybe they recur. And I think sometimes there can be a tendency for people to assume that something stands in for something else, but it doesn't necessarily. I like the idea that it could be as much, drawing a car could be for me as much a formal interest in the shape and structure of a car as what it may mean for me personally, or the associations I have of it, or the cliches and tropes that surround it as a vehicle of movement, and what the philosophical space of a car is, what it means to have a conversation in a car as opposed to a bar or in a cafe or whilst walking. So I think it's just those kind of things, and it's because the work is figurative, and it's always kind of framed by these figurative registers and kind of formal investigation. These things just come. But of course, because things, for each image in the book, there's probably 10 images that aren't in the book. So there's a process of selection there, and sometimes it's trialing things out, and then, it's really about the way that I exhibit work is really about the associative qualities between different works, and working between different mediums. Those critique one another. A work on paper maybe is able to critique the materiality of a ceramic, and in turn a painting on canvas. So the kind of formal elements of the work, the motifs are also doing that in a sense. They establish conversations between the different disparate elements, but hopefully one that feels cohesive. But I really quite, I find it interesting that the work is open to interpretation. I don't really want to attach a fixed meaning to it.
So are you drawing objects and people around you, or is this more imaginary?
Um, it's a lot of different things. It's, there's a lot of kind of screen grabs on my computer, from just things that are on, or, from memory, perhaps sometimes from sketches. It's really, there's not any really fixed methodology. But I think, I mean, I was recently drawing. Yeah, I mean, I don't have like a Volkswagen catalog, but I draw from, But when I was growing up, my family always had Volkswagen Golfs. So I kind of know what a Golf looks like from that memory of having been in one so many times. So it kind of comes from that, perhaps. But then if I want a car reference, then I might look at a picture of a car, but it's really just what's at hand.
Hmm.
But my
I
computer
love,
is a sort of wasteland of hundreds of images,
right,
that I sometimes
right,
will just flick through.
right. And art, is some of it self-portraiture?
Um, Maybe, but only as much in how, that there's something so strange, I think, about deciding to spend so much time doing something, but essentially doesn't really have any purpose, in terms of art making. So there's a kind of self-awareness of that, and maybe that touches on portraiture. And maybe there's a sort of, like a self-deprecating quality to some of the work, but it's not. Yeah, I mean, and maybe that's more where titling comes in, or that allows a bit more of a personal register in the work.
Can you talk about the title Full Gas?
Yeah, yeah. It's quite a late decision. I was originally had a few different titles in mind, but titling is quite important, I think, for me, because it allows another voice to the work, and it softens the work, or if there's humor, it makes it more explicit, or it can be a red herring. It just allows another
Mm.
framing of the work. And in the studio, I often watch a lot of cycling, and it's kind of, there's a lot of commentary, and sometimes the commentary is really, really banal. And there's this phrase, full gas, which means when you're just cycling flat out, but it gets said so often that it doesn't mean anything. And, you just get these kind of Dutch guys going like, full gas, yeah, full gas today. And I guess I thought there's something funny about the idea that this book is overwhelming in a sense, in that there's so much work. So it's kind of like a full gas approach to making work, but it's not really, because there was 700 days in 2 years, and actually when you split it down in those terms, it's not really full gas, it's more soft pedaling. But yeah. But the car on the front cover is a bit of a red herring in a way, because gas, you think of American cars, like you go to the gas station, and then you've got this car on the cover. So there's a not a red herring, but there's a bit of a slippage there, perhaps, which is meant to kind of mislead. But also, I mean, that you don't need to know that title, really. The significance of that title for me has something, but it doesn't need to be understood to make sense or unlock the work at all.
I think there's quite a feeling of impatience in the work and sort of agitation, and then I get to the I love the image with the images of the cars. The wheels are like pressing, are distorted with
Yeah.
sort of the impatience of movement or something, and that really made me smile. So there's a lot of humor in the book.
Yeah, I mean, there's something funny now about kind of cars, because drawings and paintings are always static. And when you think of the kind of, like Bomberg or someone like that, so interested in movement, you look at the vorticists or futurism, and they're so obsessed with movement. And you're looking at a painting from 10 years ago. It's just a painting of a train, and it's so static. So I guess there's that kind of paradox of trying to kind of illusionistically capture something, and the drawing's doing that. But there's a kind of, it's sort of drawing how something feels. I guess a lot of the time that's what I'm trying to do in a way. But what does it feel to be a car tire revolving? What does it feel like to be going fast? And then maybe that touches on kind of, the shorthand that cartoonists would use for that.
Mm.
A Wile E. Coyote running at an angle, to show he's moving fast. But I mean, that happens because it's animation, but if it's a still image, it looks strange.
It has got the feeling of a graphic novel in lots. in lots of ways. It's quite, and the mood changes to me from being quite melancholic to begin with, and then this kind of liberation sort of whoosh off in the car feeling of a road movie at the end.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, you know, it's 2 years of work, so I'm sure, you know, there's lots of kind of arcs. I mean, I don't think the work is ever, you know, I don't ever have a crummy day and then sit down to make a work about my crummy day. You know, but I suppose there's themes, and your mindset shifts. And certainly when the book started, I was, you know, the very first works were made in Germany, and then I was relocating back to England, and I didn't really know where I was living. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. And then I think towards the end, maybe there was a bit more stability in terms of what I was doing and how things were looking. So maybe that does register in the work. Yeah, and maybe there's, you know, also I think getting into the stride, there was a funny conversation where, you know, with Hugh, so there's something like 440 works from this 2-year period that were scanned. And then we had this Google Drive folder and the seasons. And then each season had a kind of questionable folder. And there were works I really didn't want in the book, but felt important to be in the book. And, you know, because something, but it's about this kind of, if you don't want this proficiency or like a slick book. So sometimes there are works in that are a bit rubbish or a lot weaker than some of the later work, but that's kind of this arc that's suggested by the seasons. But there were definitely works, you know, and I'd sometimes be talking to Hugh, and I was really struggling with, you know, making peace that this book, this certain image maybe was going to be in the book, but then you have to see it kind of collectively to understand it has a role.
So do you work really quite fast?
So sometimes, I mean, with these works, a lot of these prints, you know, because some of the prints are maybe 10 or 15 colors, and they're hand-drawn one-offs on, you know, kind of monotypes.
Right.
So it may be that so you notice certain colors recur, but they're all mixed from just red, yellow, and blue. So it may be that I had a mauve, for instance, and then I would put 10 sheets of paper and make 10 different drawings, you know, and then maybe there's another color. So some of them would be made over a month or two. And it was just when I was, you know, because I wasn't always in London, I wasn't always in my studio, I was commuting to Cornwall and teaching there. And, you know, so sometimes, but I think maybe that was quite helpful to have that space from the work and come back to it, and not, maybe you thought, you know, sometimes I'd make pencil notes before leaving, this bit should be orange, and then I'd forget and I'd have made it black or purple.
Right.
And then I'd realize,
Right.
well, that note meant, you know, what role did that note play there? And I have to rub it out, you know. So yeah, but some of them were quite quick, you know, a lot of the watercolor works or oil, a lot of the oil on paper works were just done in all wet oil, just one go.
Are they monoprints?
Yeah, some of them
Some of
are. So
them.
it's a really simple setup. I have this mirrored thing here, and then this really ancient roller. And then I would just roll out ink, and then you just reverse the paper and draw. And, you know, there's something there. It gives you a distance from the work because everything is in reverse and you can't necessarily quite control how it's going to look. And, you know, maybe you've inked it up too much or you've not inked it up enough. And it's not to kind of highlight that process, but it's just something that sort of takes you slightly out of yourself or just puts the work in a slightly different space.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of the, particularly at the end, a lot of the works right at the end. So all of these works are all monoprints.
Oh, it's got an impatient wheel, that one, and that one.
Yeah, this is
I like
quite,
the impatient wheels. Would
yeah, it's
anyone?
racing towards the end, and people lying
Yes.
down, a lot of people sleeping.
Ah,
Yeah. So
so
yeah,
I I've been asking the questions, but please do use the chat if you would like to ask questions um, at all. We've got 5 minutes. So I guess something that I hedge around with the work is that what speaks to me is a kind of awkwardness of the human body, of the sort of inhabited body, and the comic potential of the male body. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, for sure. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean, that's something, when I had a show in London a few years ago, a gallery called Pump House, and Angela had come to that show and commented on that then. And I suppose it's about being able to laugh at yourself, you know, because other people invariably will laugh at you and not always when you want them to, or for the reasons that you want them to laugh. So maybe the work has, but that's not to kind of mean that the work is not serious, or that it's, you know,
Mm,
it's meant to
mm,
be,
mm.
yeah, like a humane laughter to it or something.
I suppose we have a lot of, I think of Renoir and Matisse and artists like that, where they get the sense of the inhabited, usually female body, the sort of weight of flesh or what have you. But and so it's, I find it refreshing to there's a you know, I find it kind of refreshing to have a male body as the subject of work as well, you know, and kind
Yeah,
of placed like
I mean,
that.
there's kind of all sorts of bodies in it, you know, and I mean, there's
Mm,
not, it's, yeah, there's kind of all sorts, and sometimes they'll just be hands or feet, you know, or noses
mm.
or whatever. It's all different parts. So it's never really, you know, there's not too much kind of, sort of everything's in there together, I suppose.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And
And
I
it's
mean,
often
cars are a kind of cliche symbol of masculinity, right? So there's,
right.
that's maybe in a
Right.
way like these kind of deflated tires or these pathetically lurching tires. It's as much
Yes.
about that, you know. I mean, I had
Ah,
quite a bad accident where I was hit on my bike, and there was an idea maybe that some of the work was about processing that trauma, because it was, but it kind of wasn't really about that. But I suppose people could read it as that. But it was really just cars are, you know, cars are daft. I remember being a teenager and having this knackered old car, you know, and spending ages of time filling dents in it, and then the next day it just broke irreparably, and then it got scrapped, and I had to pay someone to take it away. So it's as much about that, you know, the stupidity of these machines. Um,
there's a question. Can I ask from Leomi Sadler? Can I ask if you see the book as like the final home for these images? Are the pictures made knowing that they'll be in a book?
yeah. Hey, Leonie. Thanks for the question. Yeah, no, they weren't. A lot of these works preceded the conversation with Hugh, but then Hugh and I had for a long time spoken about doing something together. And I think there's a process of transformation where they're scanned and, you know, they're printed with offset lithography, so they become something different anyway. Um, and I think this feels like a really good home for all of them. And I don't imagine showing all of them ever together, but there will be a launch, for instance, in London when COVID allows, and some of the works will be exhibited, but I don't think all of them. But I think here, as a kind of time capsule, they definitely belong in the book as a whole, for sure. Does that answer the, is that a, cool, thank you. Yay.
So do you want okay. Okay, that's another one from Hannah Waldron. Charlie, I know you've always got a book on the go. How does reading bleed into the work, if at all? The ravens make me wonder what you were reading at the time.
Yeah, it's a really good question. As from Hugh, so that's Hugh the designer, Hugh Frost with Hannah. Um, yeah, that's. I think the birds. I've had this screen grab on my desktop for ages, which is a still image from this film made about Vincent van Gogh called Lust for Life, and he's kind of painting at this canvas in a field, and he's got this furrowed brow, and there are these kind of black birds hovering over him, like these kind of, and this kind of cliche of a tortured artist in the field, you know. So the birds were kind of creeping in for a while, and I mean, from works from 5 or 6 years ago, they were there slightly. In terms of the, I don't know whether what I was reading at the time. I mean, a lot of different stuff, really, lots of different things. Tried to read quite eclectically, but it definitely feeds into the work, you know, in senses. And, you know, certainly maybe I was reading some of the Strugatsky brothers, you know, Russian pulpy science fiction, and I think that was quite formative in terms of maybe starting to think about the spaces and kind of contain spaces and ideas of zones within works, because there is a kind of movement towards architecture at the back of the book, which wasn't really there at the beginning, because things just seemed to float in these spaces without any anchoring. And I got to a point where I felt a bit frustrated by that, although it lacked a kind of wider framing. Is that, hopefully that answers the question, or maybe it was just evasive and didn't.
Okay, well, we've done our half an hour, so uh, really interesting to chat with you, Charlie, and thanks for coming and thanks for a couple of great questions. And enjoy the rest of your day,
Right. Yeah. Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
Angela. Cheers. Bye. Thanks, everyone.